Our last class we start discussion on chapter reverse charge mechanism, and in that class we discuss about section 9 subsection 3 of CGST Act 2017, where reverse charge on supply has been explained. That means the types of supply on which reverse charge mechanism will be applicable, it has been discussed in section 9 subsection 3 of CGST Act 2017, and in that area we discuss only serial number, we discuss only number 1, first category of supply of services that act at RCM, and it was the service provided by goods transport agency. Now the next point is that means the next types of services on which reverse charge mechanism is to be applied is that services provided by an individual advocate, including senior advocate or firms of advocates, by way of legal services, directly or indirectly. So the service is provided by an individual advocate, including a senior advocate or firm of advocate, by way of legal service, directly or indirectly. Now here the explanation of the legal services is that any services provided in relation to advice, consultancy or assistance in any branch of law in any manner, and includes representational services before any court, tribunal or authority. Now here the provider of the service is the individual advocate, is an individual advocate, including a senior advocate or firms of advocates. And here if the recipient of the services is any business entity located in taxable territory, then it will attract reverse charge mechanism. That means here the recipient of the services, being an business entity located in taxable territory, are liable for paying GST. Now here the business entity located in taxable territory is deemed recipient. It is to be assumed that the business entity located in the taxable territory, they are to be taken as deemed recipient. That means the business entity located in the taxable territory who is litigant, applicant or petitioner shall be treated as the person who receive the legal services. So for providing legal services by an individual advocate, including senior advocate or firms of advocate, to any business entity which is located in taxable territory, is covered under reverse charge mechanism. And here the recipient of the services, that means the business entity located in the taxable territory, are liable for paying GST on that service. Now the question is, if the recipient of the services is other than the business entity, then what will happen? If the recipient of the services are not a business entity which is registered, then here such type of services are exempt from GST. Now the third category of the services on which reverse charge mechanism is applicable is service supplied by an arbitral tribunal to a business entity. Now here the provider of the service is an arbitral tribunal, and recipient of the services is the business entity located in taxable territory. So here the business entity that is located in taxable territory, being the recipient of services from the arbitral tribunal, is responsible for paying GST under reverse charge mechanism. Now we discuss few examples on such type of the services. Now the first example is that senior advocate supplied services of rupees 1,50,000 to business entity for legal services. Business entity has input tax credit of rupees 7,000. Senior advocate has registered office in Chennai. Business entity is located in Madurai. Now find the following: who is liable to pay GST and the net GST liability. Here it has also been stated in the question that all services rendered in month of October 2017, turnover of the business entity in the previous year is 43 lakhs and applicable rate of GST is 18%. Now since the service is being provided by a senior advocate to a business entity located in taxable territory by way of legal consultancy, that by way of legal services, here the business entity as the recipient of the services are responsible for paying GST under reverse charge mechanism as per section 9 subsection 3 of CGST Act 2017. Now business entity being the recipient of the services is liable to pay GST. The net GST liability, here the rate of GST is 18%. So here the net GST liability will be 1,50,000. That means the charges taken for providing services. If we assume that the charge of rupees 1,50,000, that means the consideration that is received by the senior advocate for providing legal services to business entity, that this amount is excluding of GST, then the amount of GST will be rupees 1,50,000 into 80%, and that is to be segregated between CGST and SGST, because here it is assumed that such type of services is being provided within state. So here the GST is to be segregated in two parts, CGST and SGST, both at the rate of 9%. So here CGST will be 1,50,000 into 9%, that means rupees 13,500, and SGST will be 1,50,000 into 9%, that means rupees 13,500. Now the next question is whether the recipient of services are allowed to utilize input tax credit against his GST liability. That means here the GST liability is rupees 13,500, CGST is rupees 13,500, and SGST is rupees 13,500, and here the business entity has already ITC, input tax credit of rupees 7,000. Now the question is whether this input tax credit can be allowed, this input tax credit, that means rupees 7,000, is allowed to be set off against his GST liability, against its GST liability. Now since here the GST is paid on reverse charge mechanism by the recipient, here the recipient are not eligible for taking input tax credit against the GST liability that is arises on reverse charge mechanism. However, payment of GST under reverse charge mechanism, the amount of GST that is paid under RCM can be availed as input tax credit against outward supply. I repeat again that here the business entity has already eligible for getting input tax credit of rupees 7,000 against its output tax as per the normal procedure. That means if the GST is paid under forward charges by the business entity, if the GST liability arises in the hands of the business entity under forward charges, then it is eligible for taking input tax credit against such GST liability. But whenever the GST liabilities arises on account of reverse charge mechanism, then the business entity is not eligible for getting input tax credit against the GST liability that is being arises on the ground of reverse charge mechanism. So here the GST liability that is arises in the hands of business entity are not being allowed to adjust through input tax credit, but the amount of GST that is being paid by the business entity on account of reverse charge mechanism, that amount of GST can be eligible for input tax credit when the output supplies are made. That means here that amount of GST which is paid under reverse charge mechanism that are allowed to be allowed to be